If an avoidant can't stop thinking about you, it's not because they miss you. It's because something inside them stopped working the way it used to. Pause with that for a moment, because this reframes everything. People assume about avoidance. We're conditioned to believe that thinking equals missing, that rumination means longing, that repeated thoughts are proof of emotional attachment. But with avoidance, it's different. When they can't stop thinking about you, it's rarely about desire at first. It's about disruption. Something in their internal system, the one designed to keep emotions contained and manageable, has malfunctioned. Avoidants rely on emotional predictability to feel safe. They organize their lives around minimizing intensity, reducing dependency, and staying one step ahead of vulnerability. When they leave, detach, or create distance, it usually restores balance. Relief follows. Calm returns. That's how it's supposed to work. Except sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the detachment doesn't bring peace. Sometimes the space feels louder than connection ever did. And that's when thinking begins. What they're experiencing isn't nostalgia, it's cognitive dissonance. Their decision was meant to close a chapter, but instead it opened a loop. The mind keeps circling back, trying to locate the point where things went off script. Why doesn't this feel resolved? Why am I still aware of them? Why didn't distance fix this? These questions aren't emotional yet, but they're dangerous because they undermine the avoidance core belief that stepping away equals safety. This is why the thinking feels intrusive to them. It's not comforting, it's irritating. It challenges their identity as someone who doesn't get stuck, who doesn't linger, who moves on cleanly. And when that identity is threatened, the nervous system responds. Restlessness creeps in. Distraction fails. Silence becomes uncomfortable. The mind starts doing the one thing it wasn't supposed to do, reopen something that was meant to be sealed. So when an avoidant can't stop thinking about you, don't romanticize it too quickly. See it for what it is. A system, error, a strategy that once worked is no longer sufficient. And before emotion ever enters the picture, there has to be this moment of internal malfunction, this moment where detachment stops delivering the relief it promised. That's the real beginning, not missing, not regret, but the quiet realization that distance didn't do what it was supposed to do, and now something deeper has to be faced. The first sign isn't longing, it's irritation. When an avoidant can't stop thinking about you, the shift doesn't look romantic at first. It looks restless. It looks agitated. It looks like someone who should feel fine, but doesn't. Their usual emotional shutdown, the mechanism they've relied on for years to stay in control, starts failing in subtle but deeply unsettling ways. The distractions that once worked stop doing their job. Work doesn't absorb them the way it used to. Socializing feels loud but empty, even solitude. Something avoidants often pride themselves on loses its comfort. They tell themselves, I'm fine, with the same confidence they always have, but their nervous system isn't convinced. Something underneath keeps buzzing, refusing to settle, refusing to go quiet. This is the moment silence starts to feel louder than connection ever did. What once felt like relief, space, distance, and dependence now carries an edge of discomfort. Freedom doesn't feel expansive anymore. It feels oddly hollow, calm, which they once equated with safety, starts to feel wrong, almost suspicious. They notice themselves replaying moments they thought were resolved, not because they miss you, but because their internal equilibrium has been disturbed. Their body senses a disruption before their mind can make sense of it. And that irritation they feel, it's not anger at you. It's frustration with the fact that their inner world is no longer obeying them. Avoidants are wired to regulate emotion by minimizing it. When something becomes too intense, they detach, intellectualize, or distract themselves until the feeling fades. But when they can't stop thinking about you, those tools stop working. Rationalizations feel thin, like stories that no longer convince the person telling them. It wasn't that serious. It wouldn't have worked anyway. I'm better off. These thoughts used to calm them. Now they echo without landing. The mind keeps circling back, not out of longing, but out of irritation that the problem hasn't been solved. And for an avoidant, an unsolved emotional problem feels like a threat. What's important to understand is this. You're not on their mind because of nostalgia. This isn't about missing late night conversations or shared routines. It's about the fact that their avoidance strategy, the thing that kept them feeling powerful and unbothered, has developed a crack. You represent something unresolved, something that didn't neatly disappear when they walked away. And unresolved experiences are deeply uncomfortable for someone who depends on emotional closure to feel safe. They don't think, I want them back. They think, why isn't this done yet? And that question alone is enough to keep you present in their thought. At this stage, they don't feel love. Love would require vulnerability. And vulnerability is still too threatening. What they feel instead is unease, a low-level persistent tension they can't quite name. It shows up as impatience, restlessness, or even irritation at small things. They might snap more easily, feel bored more quickly, or lose interest in things that once grounded them. Internally, something feels off, but admitting that would mean admitting they're affected. So the feeling gets redirected, mislabeled, or pushed outward. Yet, it doesn't leave. It waits. And for an avoidant, unease is dangerous. Unease signals a loss of control. It suggests that something or someone has reached past their defenses and left an imprint. This is why irritation is the first sign. Irritation is safer than sadness, safer than longing, safer than grief. It allows them to stay in a position of psychological distance while their system quietly tries to recalibrate. But the longer the irritation lingers, the harder it becomes to deny that something meaningful happened. Because if nothing mattered, nothing would be stirring now. This is also why doing nothing is often more powerful than trying to provoke a response. The absence of pressure gives the unease space to grow. No reminders, no explanations, no emotional bids, just quiet. And in that quiet, their internal noise gets louder. They can't blame you for reaching out. They can't accuse you of pulling them back in. All they're left with is the uncomfortable truth that their mind keeps returning to something they believed they had already escaped. So if you sense irritation rather than longing, don't mistake it for indifference. Indifference is calm, irritation is agitation. And agitation means movement beneath the surface. It means the emotional shutdown is no longer airtight. It means their nervous system has detected a loss it hasn't processed yet. They may not understand it. They may resist it. They may never say it out loud. But the fact remains, when an avoidant can't stop thinking about you, the first thing that breaks isn't their detachment, it's their peace. When an avoidant thinks about you too much, their ego panics. This is the phase almost no one witnesses, because it happens entirely behind closed doors. Outwardly, they still appear composed, detached, even certain, but internally something very specific is unfolding. Their ego is scrambling to reassert control over a story that no longer feels stable. Avoidants rely heavily on self-narratives to feel safe. They need to believe they made the right choice at the right time for the right reasons. When thoughts of you keep resurfacing, it threatens that certainty, and the ego responds the only way it knows how, by rewriting the past. They start replaying moments, not because they miss you, but because they're trying to regain psychological authority over the situation. Their mind loops through conversations, conflicts, and turning points, searching for proof that they were justified. This isn't a soft emotional reflection, it's a strategic one. The questions that arise aren't romantic. They're deeply unsettling to someone who needs to feel in control. Did I misjudge them? Why didn't they chase me? Why does losing them feel like failure? Each question pokes at the foundation of the story they told themselves when they left. At first, the ego does what it's always done. It protects, it minimizes your value to reduce the sense of loss. It exaggerates your flaws to restore emotional distance. It reframes the ending as an escape rather than a rupture. I dodged something. It would have been worse later. They were too much. These thoughts aren't lies in the traditional sense. They're defenses. They're the ego's attempt to compress complexity into something manageable, something that keeps vulnerability at bay. But the problem with defensive stories is that they require consistency. And the longer an avoidant keeps thinking about you, the harder it becomes to maintain that consistency. If you were truly insignificant, why are you still on their mind? If the relationship was clearly wrong, why does its absence still register? The ego begins to feel the strain of holding a narrative that no longer aligns with their internal experience. The more they repeat it, the less convincing it sounds, even to them. This is when the story starts to crack. Small inconsistencies surface. Moments they once dismissed resurface with more nuance. Your patience, your presence, the way you didn't demand but stayed steady. Details like these become harder to ignore. The ego doesn't collapse all at once. It tightens. Confidence subtly shifts into defensiveness. Instead of knowing they made the right choice, they start needing to prove it. And needing to prove something is a sign that certainty is gone. Defensiveness shows up in unexpected ways. They might feel irritated when reminded of you, not because you did something wrong, but because the reminder destabilizes their internal logic. They might feel the urge to justify their decision to others, even when no one asked. They might rehearse explanations in their head, preparing for conversations that haven't happened. All of this energy is an attempt to protect the ego from a painful realization that walking away didn't tin a peace they expected. At this stage, they're no longer at peace with their decision, but they're also not ready to admit regret. That space in between is uncomfortable and fragile. The ego wants to restore its former position of authority, but it can't fully do that without rewriting reality in increasingly strained ways. The more effort it takes to maintain the story, the more obvious it becomes that something meaningful was lost. And meaning is the one thing avoidants try hardest to downplay after a separation. What makes this phase so powerful is that it doesn't require any action from you. In fact, your absence intensifies it. Without new information to react to, the ego is forced to work with memory alone, and memory, when not reinforced by contact, has a way of softening. The sharp edges fade. The black and white thinking blurs. What once felt like a clean break starts to feel unfinished. The ego senses this and pushes back harder, but each push costs energy. Eventually, the avoidant reaches a quiet impasse. They can either double down on a narrative that feels increasingly hollow, or they can sit with the discomfort of not being as certain as they once were. Neither option feels good. But the second one, sitting with uncertainty, is where real emotional awareness begins to emerge. Not as longing yet, not as desire, but as an unsettling awareness that their decision didn't close the chapter the way they hoped. And that's the truth beneath the ego's panic. It's not afraid of you. It's afraid of what your continued presence in their thoughts says about them, about their judgment, about their emotional limits, about the possibility that they walked away not because they didn't care, but because caring required a depth they weren't ready to face. The moment curiosity replaces detachment, they're already in trouble. This is the true turning point, and it's far quieter than people expect. There's no sudden wave of emotion, no dramatic realization, no urge to confess anything. What happens instead is subtle and destabilizing. The emotional distance they once relied on begins to feel thin, almost transparent. Detachment no longer provides relief. It just creates unanswered questions. And curiosity, which avoidants usually suppress, starts slipping in where certainty used to live. They begin to wonder things they swore they didn't care about. Have they moved on? Do they still think about me? Why do I suddenly feel replaceable? These questions don't come from desire. They come from a loss of orientation. Detachment gave them a clear position, the one who left, the one who chose, the one who stayed in control. Curiosity erodes that position. It forces them to look outward instead of staying safely contained within their own reasoning. What's most revealing is what they're not asking. They're not thinking about how to get you back. They're not imagining reconciliation or replaying romantic futures that would require emotional exposure. They're not ready for yet. Instead, they're asking something much more unsettling. Where do I stand now? Because if you've truly moved on, then their role in your life has changed without their permission. And for an avoidant, that shift is deeply destabilizing. Your silence plays a critical role here, not the performative kind, not the kind designed to provoke, but the genuine absence of emotional pressure. No explanations, no check-ins, no attempts to be understood, just quiet. That quiet removes their ability to regulate the situation from a distance. When there's no signal to react to, the mind fills in the blanks. And the blanks are rarely comforting. They don't know if you're hurting, healing, or completely unaffected. And that uncertainty pulls their attention in. Control has always been their anchor. Control over timing, control over intimacy, control over emotional exposure. It's how they maintain safety. But curiosity dissolves control because curiosity requires engagement. It requires admitting that something outside of them matters. The moment they start checking your social media, whether they admit it or not, the moment they wonder who else might have access to you, detachment has already weakened. They may still act indifferent, but internally, the emotional firewall is no longer intact. As detachment weakens, emotions don't rush in all at once. They seep slowly, uncomfortably. It might start as a strange heaviness at random moments or a subtle pull when they're reminded of you. It might show up as a flicker of jealousy they immediately try to rationalize away. I don't care who they're with. I'm just curious. But curiosity is the mind's way of opening a door without admitting it wants what's on the other side. This stage is especially confusing for an avoidant because it contradicts their self-image. They see themselves as independent, unaffected, self-contained. Feeling curious about someone they left doesn't fit that narrative, so they downplay it. They label it boredom, habit, ego, anything but attachment. Yet curiosity keeps returning because it's not about wanting you, it's about wanting reassurance that they still matter. And wanting to matter is an emotional need they rarely acknowledge. What they're slowly confronting is the realization that emotional distance doesn't equal emotional resolution. Detachment helped them leave, but it didn't help them process. And now, without your presence to react against, their inner world has to do the work. That's why this phase is so quiet. There's no drama to distract them, just a growing awareness that something unresolved is asking for attention. This is also why chasing, explaining, or reaching out too soon disrupts this process. When you step back in, you restore their sense of control. You give them a role to respond to. Curiosity collapses back into detachment, and the emotional arc resets. But when you remain absent, curiosity has nowhere to go but inward, and inward is where avoidants feel least comfortable. Eventually, curiosity becomes something they can't ignore. It transitions from casual wondering to emotional monitoring. They notice their reactions. They catch themselves caring about outcomes they claim not to care about. And that's when thinking quietly turns into feeling, not love, not longing. But awareness that your absence has weight. Awareness that they don't get to decide how much they mattered after the fact. They may never articulate this out loud. They may never reach out, but internally, something has shifted. Detachment is no longer effortless. And once detachment requires effort, it's already losing its power. Because the truth is simple, even if they resist it, curiosity is the first emotional risk they take after letting someone go. And once that risk exists, feeling is no longer optional. It's only delayed. If an avoidant can't stop thinking about you, don't interrupt it, because the mind always reaches the heart. If you don't chase it away, this is where most people undo the very shift they've been waiting for. The moment they sense movement, restlessness, curiosity, emotional cracks, they feel an urge to step in, to clarify, to check in, to remind, to do something. But interruption is exactly what stops the process. When an avoidant can't stop thinking about you, something internal is finally happening without external pressure. And that's rare. That's fragile. That's the one condition under which their defenses actually lower on their own. Avoidants don't arrive at feeling through intensity. They arrive through repetition. Thought loops soften resistance over time. Each return to the same memory, the same question, the same absence, wears down the emotional walls that logic alone built. This is why silence isn't punishment, it's space. Space for the mind to roam where it usually refuses to go. The moment you reappear emotionally, you give them something to react to instead of something to feel. Reaction is safe. Feeling is not. The mind is always the gateway for an avoidant. They don't fall into emotions. They reason their way toward them, slowly, uncomfortably, backwards. Sometimes, a thought becomes a question. A question becomes curiosity. Curiosity becomes awareness. Awareness becomes sensation. And sensation, when it's no longer immediately dismissed, turns into emotion. This is the path, but it only works if nothing disrupts it. Chasing breaks the spell because it restores their sense of control. It lets them say, I still affect them. I still have the upper hand. Control numbs the need to reflect. It gives them relief without growth. And relief without growth is exactly what allowed them to leave in the first place. When you don't chase, you remove the shortcut. They have to sit with the discomfort instead of escaping it. This is also why explanations rarely land. You think clarity will help them understand, but understanding isn't what's missing. Safety is. The avoidant nervous system doesn't open through information, it opens through self-generated insight. Insight that arrives on their own terms, without pressure, without demand. When they connect dots themselves, the realization carries weight. When you connect them for them, it feels invasive. Even if it's accurate, letting the mind reach the heart doesn't mean waiting in hope or putting your life on hold. It means refusing to interfere with a process that doesn't respond to force. It means trusting that whatever is real will surface without being chased into existence. And if it doesn't surface, that truth is information too. Because someone who only feels when prompted isn't feeling you're carrying the emotional labor for them. The hardest part is tolerating the silence without interpreting it. Silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. In the avoidant world, silence is often where the most activity occurs. It's where internal narratives collide, where certainty erodes, where control loosens, and where the emotional system, deprived of distraction, starts sending signals the mind can no longer ignore. You don't need to remind them of what you were. Memory does that on its own. You don't need to prove your worth. Absence highlights it more effectively than presence ever could. And you don't need to initiate closure. Closure, for an avoidant, isn't a conversation. It's a reckoning, one that happens internally long after the external relationship has ended. If they reach the heart, it won't look like a dramatic confession. It will look like hesitation, where there was once certainty, softness, where there was once dismissal, a pause before moving on, and maybe, only maybe, a moment where they feel something without immediately shutting it down. That moment is the result of not interrupting what their mind was finally ready to explore. And if they never reach out, if the process completes without contact, you still haven't lost because you allowed truth to unfold without distortion. You didn't chase a reaction. You honored your own stability. You chose self-respect over emotional persuasion, and that choice matters, regardless of outcome. So let the mind do its work. Let thoughts travel where they need to go. Let curiosity find its own conclusions. Because the heart can't be accessed by force, especially for someone who learned to survive by staying detached. But when the path is clear and uninterrupted, the mind will eventually arrive there on its own.